So I want to welcome everyone to our session today. My name is Carlene Gardner, and I'm the director of McGill's Office of Religious and Spiritual Life, also known as Morsel. And we are one of the service units within McGill Student Services, and we focus on spiritual wellness, which is very relevant to today's topic, as well as interfaith dialogue as a means of enhancing equity on campus. Again, very relevant to today's topic. We're very excited about it, and that is spiritual responses to the mental health crisis with the subtitle of Reclaiming Traditions and Community. And today we're going to be looking at spirituality, culture, and community as interconnected elements in a holistic approach to mental well-being. So, in the spirit of exchange and dialogue and opening, I'm joined today by my fabulous colleague and co-facilitator, Dr. Juss Kaur Rababan. Juss is an international education consultant, among many, many other things. She's a woman of many talents. She's been involved in inquiry-related research in the Department of Educational and Counseling Psychology at McGill University for a decade, where she was also an adjunct professor. She's also Morsel's Sikh Faith Volunteer, which gives her extensive experience working with both students and teachers at the intersection of spirituality and wellness and education. She's also an artist and is the author of Mantra Art, The Journey Within. Welcome, Jess. And I'm also joined today by our very special guest, Jasvir Kaur. She may be known to some of our audience today for her work in the field of Sikh music and wellness. Jasvir is also another woman of many talents. She's a lecturer and a talk show host, as well as a filmmaker, best known for the multi-award-winning documentary Sikh Musical Heritage. And in her spare time, she is also credited as the founder of Core Voices and the Me Too Sikh movement. Much of her work involves mental health education and awareness, particularly through Sikh music therapy. And we are delighted to have her here with us today, thanks to the technology of internet and Zoom. So welcome, Jasvir. So perhaps we could hear a little bit more from you on your experience and approaches to mental health work. Now, how did you get involved in this field, and how have your experiences shaped your practice and healing approaches over time?
Looking at the current state of the world where we are, mental health is something that is on the top of everybody's mind and on the tip of everybody's tongue, because the world has taken a different shape, one that none of us could have imagined or foreseen. And that's creating extra weight and emotional burden on us because we have a lot of uncertainty to tend to, and most of us are not equipped with the tools to actually address those needs. So my experience with mental health, I'm going to say I'm an expert by experience, which most of us would qualify as well. And that simply means that I've been through my own trials and tribulations of life, just like many of you here today. And I was fortunate enough to have, along my journey, accessed tools that aided me to deal with a lot of the weight I was carrying and work through those situations. Often what we do as coping methods is we work past them. We'll just shut it out, put it away, never look at it again, and keep going until one day it springs back up again. That's what we call triggers. A trigger attaches us with a past experience that we've tried to bury. We can free ourselves from those situations when we have the right tools. And I was fortunate to have accessed those in my late teens. I had been referred to counseling in school, and that I can probably talk about a little bit later. Just coming from the background that I did, which was a typical Punjabi family, raised in the middle of England in a predominantly white area. So there was a lot of challenges as a child, from bullying, racism, things going on within the home in terms of domestic abuse, and lots of other layers, which became the cause for concern in some of my teachers. And that was when I was referred to counseling. But it was after the second session, in my mind, it was clear that this is not for me. And I completely ruled it out and never looked back and said, okay, I've just got to figure out a way to get on with this. And that was where my journey began. It's not where it finished. And I think the reason for me to look more into mental health was this moment of relief that I felt for the first time in my teens, sitting in a group of my peers, talking about things from my childhood that they connected to. And all of a sudden, I felt like I was seen and I was not alone. And that for me was life-giving, because all of those years previous to that, I had felt alone and I thought it was just me. And I felt ashamed for that. And I never spoke about it to my friends, not even to my best friend, because of the shame. And now all of a sudden, having that veil lifted, that others have experienced this, or they can relate to what I'm going through or what I've been through, that was when I understood the power of what we would now call support groups or therapy, talking about things. And when we access professionals who can support us in those processes, then it completely changes where we are, and we can empower ourselves through those experiences. How it evolved through my journey was not wanting to become the victim of all of this trauma. I was always looking for a way out. I was looking for a solution to this big problem that felt like it was a weight on top of me that I couldn't get out from underneath, and I was just stuck. I somehow had to drag it through everywhere I was moving. When I met my teacher and mentor, Professor Surinder Singh, he introduced me into an element of my spiritual journey, which I wouldn't have experienced in any other space. But most importantly, he gave me access to Sikh music as a tool for therapy. And when it was introduced to me in that way, I at first couldn't believe what I was hearing, but my heart flourished. It was like, this felt like I needed this, but I didn't know it existed. And he translated it to me in a way that made sense for my emotions. And from there, I didn't look back. So my academic study and research for my bachelor's and my master's has been in Sikh music. My master's is in Sikh music therapy, and that education I was privileged enough to earn in the West. So in London is where I studied, and to go on to be able to research the benefits of this music and the profound impact it can have on humans and on our emotions. It's like being given my dream, to be able to do the work that I love and allow others to feel the same freedom that I have experienced, and to make sure that people don't feel alone in that darkness, because that is the saddest part of mental health, is when we feel alone and isolated. So this is what has driven my journey and what fuels my passion for this work.
In what ways do you see faith, or just basically religious culture and spiritual practice, including sacred music, as part of the mental health maintenance, and or recovery?
Culturally, I think there are different nuances between Western and South Asian culture, and especially in the approaches to mental health. One of the things that I learned very early on is that mental health is not something you talk about in your South Asian household. And it's not something that is a dinner table topic. You don't have those discussions there. And you just get on with it. You just, pull up your socks and keep going, because that is how our parents and our grandparents had modeled it to us. So bringing in the connection for myself, in my experience of connecting my faith with a tool to empower myself through this, it was life-giving. And I really deeply accredit my teacher to that. If I had not have encountered him, I would never have understood the power of this music. He broke it down to me and presented it to me, not from the religious angle. He presented it to me as a tool for my well-being, which is what intrigued me, fascinated me. And how he explained it to me is, when we go back in history to the founder of the Sikh faith, to Guru Nanak. Guru Nanak was known as somebody who traveled far and wide across different countries, met people of different cultures and different traditions and different faiths. Everywhere he went, till this date, he was loved by every faith group, and each wanted to claim him and own him for what he represented. And he belonged to all of them. He did not prefer one over the other. He belonged to them all. This emphasized to me the connection of humanity. And what my teacher explained to me is, there's nothing more powerful than human emotion. Wherever you go in the world, you will feel somebody's joy through their laughter. You will feel somebody's pain through their tears. We can connect with those basic things that make us human. And if we shed it all down just to the basics, the bare minimum, we are all humans wherever we are placed in the world. And if we look more towards what connects us instead of what divides us, we have a chance of supporting each other. And that was essentially what Guru Nanak set out to do, was unite and support through community. Music was the tool that he used. Music we call a universal language, because when we hear music of all different cultures and from different parts of the world with new instruments that we've never seen or heard, it brings joy. It brings excitement and wonder. And we feel like little children again when we heard our first nursery rhyme and it brought that joy. So music has that same impact throughout our lives. It's an important part of who we are. It is essentially a different form of oxygen for us. If we imagined a world without music, it would be a very grim place to be. We all have music in one way or another, whether it's just the sound of the birds that we listen to, or, you know, your dog barking, if that gives you joy, or your cat meowing. There's music everywhere in all that we do. So these were the key components that were the tools of Sikh music. And then looking at the scripture, it's the Guru Granth Sahib is written in poetic form. Poetry which is representative of every dialect and every region of India that Guru Nanak visited. So it wasn't translated into one language. It wasn't only seen through one lens. It was allowing the uniqueness and beauty of each culture to flourish and thrive together. And each poetry, each piece of poetry, the shabads, have specific rags, which are the moods that we connect to, whether that's joy, sorrow, pain, anguish, everything in between, excitement, and there's 60 of them. And these are the lenses that we want to look at our experiences through. Now I'm being given a key to access a path of my faith that I belong to through a global lens that is more than just a practice in a building. It's far wider reaching than just a religion or religious institute can reach. And this to me was powerful. This is what I wanted to access. I wanted to know how I can reach my own wellness through something that is greater and better than me, through following and taking inspiration from the sacred teachings and the sacred wisdom of these great masters, but using it in a way that is accessible for all of us. And that has changed who I am. This has helped me to understand more about myself and almost categorize my lived experience into these 60 different, almost pigeonholes. When I need to connect with a rag, I will use it through those experiences, and I can use this experience that I'm holding within me as a fuel to my spiritual connection. Or if I don't want to take it that deep, I can just use it as a process to release what I'm holding so that it doesn't consume me. This for me was the most important part of being able to connect with my spirituality, my faith, and my mental health in a very practical way.
Conversations about mental health, they are widely dominated by Western cultural values. Here in Canada, US, and in UK also. What are some of the successes and challenges that you've had in bringing, the Sikh, the Punjabi culture to these mental health conversations?
Language is a big barrier. And what I mean by language is cultural understanding. We all know what cultural appropriation is, but how many of us know what cultural understanding is? This means to know what are the needs of a particular community group and adapting the methodologies or the technology that we have in place to suit the needs of that group. What I noticed in the mental health spaces, they are all Western dominant in terms of their approach, and they don't cater to the South Asian culture or to South Asian needs. So in the last 2 years, I've seen a larger uprising of therapists who come from a South Asian background, yet they don't have enough clientele that come from the South Asian community. And the reason that they got into this field was because they wanted to serve the community. So I've had these conversations with friends of mine who are therapists, and we've troubleshooted and brainstormed that what is the disconnect. And for me, what I see as the major obstacle is that the idea of mental health being a taboo hasn't been addressed through the Western lens. Because if the community hasn't been able to create awareness and understand the need or importance of having these conversations and accessing these resources, then there is no way that they will ever step out of their comfort zone, because it's the unknown. Some of them are fearful of being judged. Some of them are fearful of people finding out. Those old ways of thinking still exist now. I know that, there's many people around me, my elders, who are still held back by those what ifs. For me, when I mentioned that in high school, I was sent to the school counselor and I had 2 sessions. In the first session, which was about half an hour long, she gave me the lowdown of how it was going to work and just asked me how I was. And I said, I'm good. And I left. And then for the second session, where she asked me to talk about what was going on, this was a 1-hour session. And when she asked me that question, and I just sat there blank for a while, because in my mind, I said to myself, why do you care? And why would I tell you what's going on? She kept being persistent in a gentle way. So I told her a few of the recent events that had taken place in my household. And the response that I received back now, when I think about it, is shocking. At that time, I brushed it off and I walked out of that room. But she said to me, I want you to know that you can be honest and you don't need to make things up. And I said, okay. And at that moment, that was when I shut down and I left the room. And now when I look back on that, the disconnect was cultural. She couldn't relate to the experiences of somebody who comes from a very typical Punjabi household. Even though I'm born and raised in England, my dad came from India and he raised me like I was being raised in the village in Punjab. So he was very strict and he had a very old school mindset. There were very heavy restrictions on me as the daughter in the household as to what I can and cannot do. In addition to that, just how our household operated, I guess for the person I was talking to, it seemed so unrealistic just because of their lived experience. So this for me is that disconnect culturally and that understanding that's required in order to build those bridges. I hope that this can evolve, because if we can't do any work in that area, it means that there'll be a massive part of the South Asian community that needs support, but will never have the means to access it. And I think this is one of the major challenges. Other challenges over the years, if I look at just being able to say the term Sikh music therapy, I don't know if I'm allowed to say that, because you can't attach the word therapy with something unless you're a licensed practitioner. Licensed according to Western institutions. I'm exploring these avenues with a few of the different music therapy bodies in the UK at the moment, but the highest qualification that you can receive to be a therapist is a master's, which I actually have in Sikh music therapy. But because Sikh music is not one of their types of music therapies that they accredit, therefore, am I a licensed therapist or am I not? Because I don't fit their description. So there is still much work to do. And oftentimes, most people in these rooms where we're talking about mental health, firstly, it's taken time to accept alternative and complementary therapies in mental health conversations. So to bring in another type of or another approach to music therapy is difficult, because when you say Sikh music therapy, people are afraid that this is religious music that we're bringing into this space. And that's not what music therapy is about. So until we are open to developing more cultural understanding, to appreciate the different techniques and tools that are available to us to address mental health, I don't think that we're going to see much evolution. And I guess in terms of success, all I can tell you is that it does work because it worked on me. And there are many, many, many students and members of our Raj Academy family that are extended across the world who have experienced the same benefits of wellness in terms of their emotion through going through this journey of self-exploration and healing, which is essentially what this is. So I think at the moment we have more challenges, but that's a good thing because it means we have work to do.
I am a little bit encouraged because I do see more openness here, at least in Montreal, to, exploring, the different intersectionalities of identity and how it can affect a therapeutic practice. But again, like you, I think we still have a long way to go. Even just talking about religion here in Quebec, where McGill is located, is, sometimes quite contentious, and it can be difficult for students to almost out themselves as religious. And so to hear your stories about accessing that musical heritage and how powerful that was in a very non-analytical way, right? In a very feeling and emotional way. And that's the kind of responses that I think are the most helpful when we're looking at trauma and healing. We do in Canada have generational trauma in our Indigenous communities, something we're very much aware of, mostly as a result of the really terrible experience with the residential school systems that happened here for many, many decades. And you talked a little bit about, your family, their immigration experience as well. And I'm wondering if there's any parallels with the histories of colonialism and genocide and how those might have impacted spiritual well-being, particularly for young people who might be carrying trauma of their parents' past, whether knowingly or unknowingly.
Colonialism has had a massive impact, especially on the Sikh faith. If I look at the colonization angle before I go into the generational trauma, and this dates back to the early 1900s, which is not very long ago if we think about it, but history, and this has just been journeying through my own research and interest in this field. The practice of Sikhs was vastly different to how we were and who we were as a people up until the mid 1800s. From the time that the British entered India, one of the key things that was their focus was to change as many components as they could, from language to food to healthcare to education to our spiritual practice. The reason that I work in the field of Sikh music, my teacher has been spearheading and pioneering the movement to revive these traditional string instruments. Just mentioned, I play the rabab. If we go back 30 years, you would have possibly heard the name of rabab, but you wouldn't have seen what the instrument looks like or heard the sound of it, or even had the opportunity to hold it in your hands, let alone meet somebody who can play the instrument in the modern world. And this was part of my journey of learning through Sikh music, that where are these string instruments and what happened to them? Why is it that across the whole world, every single Sikh Gurdwara that you visit is vacant of these instruments, but dominated by the harmonium, which is a European instrument made in the 1840s? I think the answer is self-explanatory. A lot more is discovered and shared in our documentary. Just that in itself shows how vastly colonization has impacted the Sikh faith if we look at just one angle. And there is a lot of evidence to all of these different occurrences that took place. It was a painful journey for myself when I made that discovery, because everything around us, and Jasvir, you can speak to this. I mean, every single Gurdwara we go to, if you were to ask the question to most people, what is a traditional Sikh instrument? They may not be able to tell you, and they will probably point you to the harmonium, which was a part of my journey too. When I questioned my elders, most of them had no idea, and they'd never looked at it beyond the obvious, beyond what they were given. They didn't actually research into finding out where the harmonium came from, what instruments were used by the Sikh gurus at the time that this music was introduced or that the Sikh faith was born. And I think that is very traumatic in itself, to know that who you were meant to be is different to who you are, but not by any fault of your own. simply by the events of history. And when you come to that discovery, it's deeply unsettling, because all of a sudden you've lost trust, but you don't know what you've lost trust in. And this was difficult for me. So the work that I do now as an educator is to ensure that when I'm sharing this information, I'm sensitive to those needs of anybody who's receiving that information. And you can look at that as generational trauma, because it has been handed down to us. And especially when the generations in between have been raised to believe that what they are holding is their own, being the harmonium. And then when people like myself come in as an educator to say, actually, this isn't ours, we have to face the opposition. We become the enemy all of a sudden. And we've had to play that role. I think that's the space of academia and education, is to have those conversations and hopefully open people's hearts and minds to researching and learning that maybe there was something different. But oftentimes, most of us in general society, we like to stick to what's comfortable. I don't think we can change that. And now to go to the generational trauma, I think that it's a very timely question for me. And I was thinking about this morning very deeply. First, when I was introduced to the idea of generational trauma or intergenerational trauma, it took me a while to actually make my own connection and think about which parts of my mother's trauma I had inherited from her. And there are some social norms in South Asian culture amongst women that become, what do I say? They're a normal part of our environment, and you inherit them without knowing them. Some of that is the inequality of how boys and girls are treated in a household. And although the Sikh faith is one that promotes equality, in the Punjabi culture and in our households, we don't always implement those values of equality, and we differentiate between both genders. So these things become normal and acceptable, although they are blatantly contradictory. And if I'm looking around me at the moment, I see the impact very heavily of that generational trauma. And what I mean by that is, some of you may be aware, others are maybe not aware, but currently in India, there is one of the world's biggest protests of all of our history taking place, where farmers are protesting. And on the front lines, the risks that this raises and has already raised. A lot of my friends and family that are placed globally across the world that are having these conversations on social media platforms, there's fear. There's fear and there's question when the government isn't listening and they are being so aggressive in their response. Will history repeat itself? Will we once again become the people that are sitting at the end of another genocide? Will that happen again? And those fears are real, because we see the responses. And before this event, these were things that we had read about or heard about in our history. Never did we think we'd become a generation that may have to witness this as well. And that is deeply disturbing. So the impact of it is massive. We wouldn't think that these sorts of events would occur in the 21st century in the modern world, but we are here. And I think that what's important in this question is, how do we show up for those needs? How do we try to create those layers of support so we don't feel isolated, and where the fear and the weight of the trauma doesn't consume us?
Brought light on a very important topic, which is the repetition of history, bringing the traumas and making them alive again in many people.
Mm.
And in addition to this, we have also got this mental, the crisis of COVID that we are dealing with. In addition to that, people are very, very lonely right now. They are the lifestyle has completely changed. It's just one layer of trauma, on another. So, but if you were to look at some of the young people in the community, how are they talking about mental health and inner wellness? Do you see that there is a voice there really now that is changing? What are the traditions that they still find valuable and want to maintain? And what is it that they want to do differently now? Because somehow I feel there is change, yet there is still that underlying layer that needs to be addressed along with all these issues
Mm.
that we have currently.
I think that now in our community, the young people are leaning into that power of using their voices. And this is the purpose of the work that I'm doing with Core Voices. And although it's spelt Kaur, it's the play on the word that it's our core voices within us. All types of feelings and emotions and traumas that we go through that need to be addressed. It's important to have safe spaces where we can talk about them. And I'm really glad to see our young people are doing that work to become more, I don't want to say accepting, I think understanding of their own needs. Because our parents' generation, I don't think that they were afforded that luxury. They were in a different time and in a different struggle. They were trying to, they were They were in that process of economical migration, moving from their homeland to a foreign land, learning the ways of that land, the language, and the cultures, and trying to fit in and battling racism and lots of other different layers of complexity. They weren't afforded the luxury of being able to tend to their emotional wellness, which is why they haven't been able to support their children in the way that we would have liked them to show up for us. But I think that the younger generation are becoming more understanding of that, and they're creating the spaces that they would have dreamt of. I mean, that is how Core Voices was born. I would have loved for that to have existed when I was a child.
Mm.
I would love I would have loved for many of these organizations that exist now to have existed then. But I think the great thing is that they exist now, and at least we have them, and that gives us space to grow. So there is a lot of positivity and hope, I think, when I look at the young people, because understanding, openness, and even compassion for yourself are not easy things to do.
Mm.
But just the fact that self-care is now a normal term to use and people know what that means. It means I have to take a moment to just check in with myself and see how am I doing, because I deserve that. And I am worthy of greatness. So I need to take that moment to look after myself. That in itself is magical. So the fact that we've come from, I think even in British culture, mental health up until recently, it wasn't widely addressed in a positive way. It was seen as something negative, that, oh, you've got mental health issues, and it was used in a very derogatory way. But now there's that transformation happening in those spaces around us as well. So I think the more positive reinforcement there is for us to tend to those needs and care for ourselves, the more hope that there is for those conversations to evolve. And you asked me about values. The values of our tradition, of South Asian tradition. And I have actually asked some of my friends these questions, and it wasn't an easy one for most people to actually address, because if I asked myself that question, there's so many things I love about my culture and my heritage, but there are, I think, equally or possibly more things in terms of how we operate in our South Asian culture, of things that I would like to change. I want to say dislike, but I'll say change. And, I mentioned it earlier, that the gender inequality, there is a lot of contradictions that we see. There's these ideals that are presented to us in our faith spaces. And it's like, you want to be this model human being. But then when we enter our social spaces, there's a complete contradiction. And we don't have enough examples of what a balance looks like. And I think we then make it very unrealistic to be better, because we either put somebody very quickly up on a pedestal if they're doing something good or commendable in a faith space. But then if we see them do something that we don't like outside of that space, we just as fast we tear them down from that pedestal, and then they have no chance of redemption. And this is a very unforgiving, brutal system. And this is how our society is built. So I'm very happily divorced. And I've had to learn to own that in a positive way and come forward in my social settings when I'm attending family functions to say that to people with confidence, that as a woman, as a British Sikh woman, I'm happy being divorced. And you don't have to give me the pity eyes and say, oh, are you okay? Or try to encourage me to go off and marry again, because I don't desire that for myself. I'm comfortable where I am. But if I look again, just not even half a decade ago, this is not something that is easy for any South Asian woman to say openly in a public setting, because you're potentially the victim of being ostracized. There's something wrong with you and never wrong with the man. And these are things that are inbuilt into the entire South Asian community. They're not unique to one particular group. And those layers are there, and they are contradictory of everything that every South Asian faith teaches. Those were most of the common things, that the contradictions, the hypocrisy of wanting to create these ideal humans, but then only putting that weight onto the females to be almost these Virgin Mary type images, and boys can go and do whatever they wish. So I think that gender inequality is something that needs to be looked at in balancing in our community, and I hope that the younger generation is a way for us to get there, because I do see a lot of young women stepping forward into their power, using their voices and doing it in a positive way. So it's not to create an imbalance where one gender is weighing down over the other, but rising together and embracing the strengths of each gender, of all people, and saying that we each have the right to be treated with respect and dignity, and my feelings matter as much as yours do. And if you're given this opportunity, I'm as deserving of such an opportunity. And just that level of care can be transformational in building that connect that we would have longed for. So I see this happening in young people. I see this happening in their spaces. So as much as there is to love and celebrate in our culture, I think there is still a lot of work for us to do. And just having these conversations, and this space in itself is transformational. To be able to have this conversation with us all here in this room through the means of technology means that maybe this might support one person in making a difference in how they talk to somebody or how they address difficult situations. And that's enough.
It was really interesting to hear you talk about your own research experience in terms of, rediscovering the rabab. And I just find that, we put a lot on the young people today, but at the same time, the young people look to the elders for a sense of identity and continuity, right? We're not looking for the younger people to change everything and leave the older generation behind. I think what we want to bring everybody a little bit further along, at least in terms of spiritual wellness and the mental health conversation. But I do think there is probably something unique about the younger generation, maybe some unique skills, some unique perspectives, even just the connectivity of the internet today. So what kind of attitudes or skills are you seeing prevalent among young people that's helping them cope with struggles of university life, or even your own struggles that you had as a student, and of course now even more so in COVID?
I think firstly, what I want to say is that if you are struggling, please, seek means of support and reach to people or resources out there that can support you in where you are at the moment, because it's not easy to be in that situation, and it's not comfortable to feel like you are doing this alone. It is this unpredictable world that we are in of COVID, and it is becoming, as each day passes, a new type of a normal. So how do we adapt in that? And I think cope is a very fitting word, because hopefully we don't have to live in this world forever. We just need to cope through it together. And then when we come out and see the light at the end of the tunnel, we can go back to something that was beautiful and connects humans back together again. If I were to give some things that I used to use as a go-to, breathing is very powerful. And one of my friends, and he's also a great martial art teacher, he introduced me to the idea of how physiology affects our psychology. So if you notice your body language in moments of stress, just for a second, if you step out your body and look at yourself, look at your face, feel if your jaw is clenched, is your neck tight? How are you sitting? Are you hunched over or are you sitting straight? Make these observations. And the first thing to do in a moment of stress, reset your body. Sit with your spine nice and straight. Try to make sure your legs, your lower limbs are not blocking circulation, so your legs are not crossed over. Stretch out your spine, roll your neck, and just loosen out your jaw. So even if that's just moving it side to side or up or down and opening it really wide to feel that stretch, that makes a big difference. Because what you're saying in that moment to your body is, we are not letting that stress become a permanent part of us. This body is your temple. And the greatness that lives within it is the creator, and you are part of the creation. So to look after it means to know when to let good energy in and to deflect the negative energy, and stress is a negative energy. So first recognize where you are. Feel your hands, your fingertips. Are they feeling tight? If they are, just stretch them out. Give them a really good stretch and just let the blood circulate till your hands feel warm again. When your body feels relaxed, then you want to breathe. Breathing is imperative to resetting how we manifest the emotions. If we sit blocked and really closed and small, you're going to let that stress or that whatever that trauma is that's affecting you in this moment, it's going to find a place inside your body and it's going to stay there. And anytime you are triggered, you'll feel a connection with that part of your body. I don't know if any of you have read Dr. Gabor Mate, When the Body Says No. This for me was a fascinating read. And he's a doctor who's based, I believe, in San Francisco. And he talks about this same thing, about how our body stores emotional stress. And we hold on to those emotional responses. And this is how they become owners of us. And if we're trying to empower ourselves, we have to recognize them, that we are not them. You are not your emotional response. You are not your stress. You are not that feeling. That feeling is temporary and it will pass. How it passes is when you're moving, and you move through breath. So make sure that you're breathing nice and full and feel the oxygen just nourishing your whole body and your whole being. Breathing is number one. Movement, I would say, is number two. Any type of movement, stretching, yoga, going for a walk, a swim, a run, whatever it is. But moving your body is really important, because the moment you start moving, again, it's a physical reset to say, no, you're not going to live inside me. I'm going to shake this off and I'm going to come back, and then I'm going to look at everything else with new eyes. You can be in nature. That is life-giving. There is nothing more nourishing than being in nature. So if you're combining your movement as a walk in nature and you're breathing when you're in nature, that is the most powerful way to experience this. And I think that those for me were the three most important ways to not only get through university, but this is my go-to even now. These are the things that I will do in a moment that I feel challenged or upset, or if I see myself being provoked in terms of an emotion that I'm not comfortable with allowing it to surface. I will pause and I will look at myself in that mirror and say, okay, what is my body doing? And am I breathing? Okay, no, my body's not sitting nice and tall. The oxygen isn't flowing and I'm not breathing. I'm just doing a shallow breath up here. I'm not breathing into my stomach. So let me reset that first. Let me move my body and maybe get a gust of fresh air and see how I feel. And then where does this feeling sit? And what you'll notice by that time is whatever now in this moment feels so big, after you've done just these three things, you'll see that it's all of a sudden become much smaller. And now you can look at it and say, oh, I don't need to worry about that. It's okay. But if I were to say anything in addition to those three things, I would say make sure you're nourished in terms of food, eating well, and staying hydrated. And if you look after your body and you can see how you respond, you will become the person who's in control of your responses, and you will no longer just be reacting to those situations. So I think that those would be the key things. And then connecting with joy. Do one thing every day that brings you joy. It can be anything. It could be jumping up and down on your bed. It can be singing your favorite song at the top of your lungs. It can be eating a bar of chocolate, whatever it is. If it makes you smile, make sure you do it. And at least one thing every single day. And if you're struggling on a more long-term basis, I would say having routine is something that helped me. So on the days, like when we would have breaks from university and I was at home, it was really hard to keep studying because all I wanted to do was sleep. Sleep and binge watch Friends. That's what I wanted to do. And sometimes I did because I needed to. But when I needed to really get back into the focus of working and studying, having a routine was very helpful. A routine that this is the time I'm going to wake up, this is when I'm going to have my meals. And even if that's the key part of the routine and the study time is slotted into there, wherever it fits, but there's movement time and nature time as well, that's perfect. But prioritizing that you get the right amount of sleep in your schedule, in your routine, and you have meals at given times, that can help you to work through some of those difficult phases when they do surface.